Officer Karen Delacroix lost her badge, her reputation, and every friendship she had left, all because of one traffic stop on a Tuesday night. The man she pulled over was driving a black Mercedes with his 11-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, a handmade solar system model resting beside her. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't swerving, he was just driving home. She stopped him anyway because something about the driver didn't fit the car. What she didn't know was that the man behind the wheel had spent 15 years suing officers exactly like her. Sanjay Webb had a ritual with his daughter every evening on the drive home. Zoe called it 20 questions, though it rarely stayed at 20 and almost never involved real questions. It was more like a game of wonder. Zoe would name something she'd learned that day, and Sanjay would pretend he'd never heard of it, and she'd explain it to him with the kind of seriousness that only an 11-year-old could bring to the moons of Jupiter. Tonight the subject was Saturn's rings. "Did you know they're mostly ice?" Zoe said from the back seat, her voice bright against the hum of the engine. She was holding a half-finished solar system model on her lap, foam planets dangling from fishing line, each one painted by hand over the past 2 weeks. The Earth was slightly lopsided. Mars was too orange. But Saturn didn't have its rings yet, and that was the problem she'd been working through all evening at her after-school science fair prep session. Sanjay glanced at her in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Ice! The whole ring! Mostly ice and rocks, tiny ones, billions of them." Zoe tilted the model carefully, making sure nothing tangled. "Mrs. Patterson said my Saturn needs rings by Friday or it doesn't count as Saturn. She said it's just a yellow ball without them." "Well," Sanjay said, "Mrs. Patterson has a point." "I know. That's why we have to fix it tonight." Sanjay nodded. They would fix it tonight. They always did, the two of them side by side at the kitchen table, glue and paint and Zoe's careful instructions, while Sanjay followed orders. It was their thing. It had become their thing 3 years ago after Denise died, when the quiet of the house got so heavy that they both needed something to do with their hands. The Mercedes E-Class glided through the evening with the easy silence of a car that had been well loved. It was black polished, and it still smelled faintly of the vanilla air freshener Denise used to clip to the vent. Sanjay had never changed it. He just kept buying the same brand, the same scent every few months, the way some people keep watering a garden someone else planted. Denise had picked this car. She'd circled it in a brochure, left it on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that said, "Our next chapter car." Her way of saying they'd made it, that the years of student loans and small apartments and late-night case files had led somewhere real. She put down the deposit herself. 3 weeks later, the diagnosis came. She never drove it. Sanjay finished the paperwork after the funeral. He couldn't explain it to anyone who asked, and most people didn't. But Zoe understood. Every time she climbed into the back seat, she buckled her seatbelt and then pressed her palm flat against the dashboard, a small, quiet gesture like touching a headstone, like saying hello to someone who wasn't there anymore. She'd done it tonight, too, before launching into her Saturn lecture. Now, somewhere between the science fair and the rings of Saturn, Zoe's voice had faded. Sanjay looked in the mirror again. She'd fallen asleep, her head tilted against the window, the solar system model balanced on her lap, with the care of a child who understood that fragile things needed holding. County Road 12 stretched ahead, empty and familiar. It was 8:47 on a Tuesday night, and the world was quiet. Then the lights appeared, red and blue flashing in Sanjay's rearview mirror, filling the interior of the car with that unmistakable strobe that turned ordinary objects into something sharp and urgent. Sanjay looked at the speedometer, 33 in a 35 zone. He checked his headlights. On. His taillights functional, inspected 2 months ago. His registration sticker current. His seatbelt fastened. There was no reason for this stop. He knew it the way he knew the weather, not because someone told him, but because he'd lived in it long enough. This was the 8th time. In 15 years of driving, Sanjay Webb had been pulled over 8 times without a single traffic violation. Not once had he been speeding. Not once had he run a light. Not once had any stop resulted in a ticket, a warning, or anything other than the quiet return of his documents and a "you're free to go" that always came too late to undo the feeling. He didn't get angry anymore. That had burned out somewhere around the 4th or 5th time, replaced by something heavier and harder to name, a tiredness that lived in the bones, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from the repetition of being treated like a suspicion instead of a person. Sanjay exhaled through his nose, flicked on his turn signal, and eased the Mercedes to the shoulder. Before the officer reached his window, he did what he always did, what he had trained himself to do, the way other people trained themselves to check mirrors before merging. He turned off the engine. He switched on the interior light. He placed both hands on the steering wheel, fingers spread clearly visible. These were not the habits of a guilty man. These were the habits of a man who understood that his survival could depend on the first 3 seconds of someone else's judgment. In the back seat, Zoe stirred. The flashing lights had found her face red, then blue, then red again, and her eyes opened slowly. "Daddy!" Her voice was soft, still half inside a dream. "Why are we stopping?" "It's nothing, sweetheart." Sanjay kept his hands exactly where they were. "A police officer wants to check something. Just sit still for me, okay?" Zoe blinked at the lights, then looked at her father's hands, both pressed flat on the wheel, fingers wide open, deliberate. She didn't know why he held them that way, but something about the stillness of it, the practiced precision, made her sit up a little straighter and fold her own hands in her lap. The driver's side window was already down when Officer Karen Delacroix reached the door. She was 38, 12 years on the force, and she carried herself with the squared shoulders of someone who had earned her authority and never let anyone forget it. Her service record was clean, no formal complaints, multiple commendations, a reputation among colleagues as tough but fair. She believed in that description. She'd built her career on it, and her career was the only thing she had left that still looked the way she wanted it to. The divorce had taken everything else. The house went to her ex-husband. Custody of her 10-year-old son, Ryan, went with it, not because she was unfit, but because a judge decided that a mother who worked nights, weekends, and holidays wasn't available enough. She'd fought it. She'd lost. And in the space where her family used to be, she had planted the one thing that couldn't leave her: the badge, the uniform, the daily proof that she was someone who mattered. She didn't see herself as someone with prejudice. She would never use a slur, never make a joke, never say the quiet part out loud. But in 12 years of patrol, a filter had built itself inside her, so gradual she mistook it for skill. An expensive car in a modest neighborhood, a driver who didn't match the profile her instincts had drawn, these were signals she trusted the way a doctor trusts a thermometer. She called it experience. She called it gut feeling. She never called it what it was. Tonight she had watched the black Mercedes roll past her cruiser at a perfectly legal speed. No violation, no broken taillight, no erratic driving. But something in the back of her mind had whispered that the car and the driver didn't fit, and she had listened to that whisper the way she always did, without questioning where it came from. "License and registration, please." Sanjay handed them over without a word. His movements were slow, deliberate, each one announced before he made it. "I'm reaching into my back pocket for my wallet." A sentence no one should have to say to retrieve their own identification. Delacroix took the documents back to her cruiser. She ran them through the system. The result came back clean. The car was registered to Sanjay Webb. No outstanding warrants, no prior offenses, not even a parking ticket. She should have walked back, returned his papers, and wished him a good night. That was the procedure. That was the law. That was the right thing to do. Instead, she returned to his window and started asking questions that had nothing to do with traffic. "Where are you coming from tonight?" Her flashlight swept the interior across Sanjay's suit jacket on the passenger seat, across the dashboard, across the back seat, where Zoe sat motionless with her solar system model. "I picked up my daughter from school." Sanjay answered, his tone even and measured. "We're heading home." "This your vehicle?" "Yes, ma'am." "Registration's in your hand?" "What do you do for a living, Mr. Webb?" Sanjay recognized the pattern. He'd seen it as a driver, and he'd seen it as an attorney. The slow pivot from a legitimate stop to a fishing expedition, the officer searching for something to justify a decision that had no justification to begin with. Every additional question was another shovel of dirt digging a hole that would only get deeper. He answered anyway. "I'm an attorney." Delacroix's expression shifted barely just a flicker behind the professional mask. Sanjay caught it. He'd been reading those flickers for 15 years. "Officer," he said, his voice still calm, still controlled, but carrying a clarity that landed like a closing statement. "Can I ask the specific reason I was pulled over tonight?" The question hung in the air between them, and in that moment, Karen Delacroix understood, with the sudden cold certainty of someone stepping onto ice and hearing the first crack, that she didn't have one. There was no violation. There was no probable cause. There was nothing but a feeling, and a feeling was not a legal basis for anything. She had two choices. She could hand back his documents, say, "Have a good evening," and drive away. It would mean admitting she was wrong to herself, to this man in his suit, to whatever silent judgment she imagined in his eyes. Or she could find another reason. Any reason. Something that would let her keep control of this stop, keep control of the narrative, keep the ground from shifting under her feet. She chose the second option. Not out of malice, out of pride, and pride in that moment was more dangerous than malice could ever be. "Sir, I'm detecting an unusual odor from your vehicle. I'm going to need you to step out of the car." There was no odor. Sanjay knew it. His car smelled of vanilla air freshener and the faint residue of acrylic paint from Zoe's project. Nothing more. But he also knew what happened when a black man challenged an officer's authority on a dark road at night, with his daughter 3 feet away. He knew the mathematics of that situation, the variables, the risks, the outcomes that could never be undone. He had built a career on representing the people who lived inside those outcomes. Sanjay looked in the rearview mirror. Zoe was watching him, her eyes wide and alert, now the solar system model clutched against her chest. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the weight, the way children always understand weight, even when no one explains it to them. He made his decision. "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle." Sanjay said, his words chosen with the precision of a man who knew exactly how they would read in a transcript. "I don't believe there is reasonable suspicion or probable cause. However, I will cooperate with your instructions. I want it noted that my cooperation is not consent." Delacroix stiffened. "Step out of the car, sir." Sanjay opened the door slowly, hands visible at every moment, and stepped onto the gravel shoulder of County Road 12. Behind him, Zoe pressed her face against the window, watching her father stand in the red and blue light, with his hands held open at his sides. Delacroix reached for her radio and called for backup. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that Sanjay had activated the voice recording app on his phone the moment she appeared in his mirror. It wasn't premeditation. It wasn't a trap. It was simply what he did now every time, the way he put on a seatbelt or locked his front door. A habit born not from paranoia, but from experience, from the third stop and the fourth and the fifth, and everyone after that. The recording was running, and it would capture everything that followed. The second cruiser arrived within 6 minutes, its headlights cutting through the darkness of County Road 12 and flooding the shoulder with white light. The officer who stepped out was younger than Delacroix, mid-20s, dark hair, a name tag that read Rivera. He approached the scene the way a man approaches a room where an argument is already happening, cautious, reading the temperature before committing to a position. Officer Rivera took in the situation with a single sweep. A black Mercedes engine off, interior light on. A man in a suit standing on the gravel shoulder with his hands open at his sides, palms facing forward. A child's face visible through the rear window, small and still. And Delacroix standing with her hand resting near her belt, her posture suggesting a level of threat that nothing in the scene supported. Rivera's hand did not go to his weapon. He let it hang at his side, and that small choice, the absence of a gesture, said more than any words could about what he believed was actually happening here. "What do we have?" he asked Delacroix, keeping his voice low. "Possible odor from the vehicle, running a search." Her tone was clipped efficient, the language of someone constructing a narrative in real time. Rivera glanced at the Mercedes again. He looked at Sanjay, then at the child in the back seat. Something passed across his face, not defiance, not objection, but the quiet discomfort of a man watching a scene he recognized but didn't know how to stop. He said nothing. He stepped back and held his position near the second cruiser. Delacroix moved to the rear passenger door. When she opened it, the interior light caught Zoe's face, wide eyes, lips pressed together, her arms wrapped around the solar system model, like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly started tilting. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Delacroix said. Her voice carried the flat authority of procedure, no softness, no acknowledgement that she was speaking to an 11-year-old girl sitting alone in a car on a dark road. Sanjay spoke from where he stood, his voice still measured but carrying an edge now thin and precise. "My daughter is 11 years old. She's not a suspect. I'm asking you to let her stay in the vehicle." Delacroix didn't look at him. "Sir, this is standard procedure." It wasn't. Sanjay knew it wasn't. He had litigated enough cases to know the difference between protocol and power. But he also knew that the distance between knowing your rights and exercising them could be measured in consequences, consequences that fell hardest on people who looked like him on nights like this, on roads like this. Zoe looked through the window at her father. He gave her a small nod, the kind of nod that carried an entire conversation in a single movement. "It's okay. I'm right here. Do what she says." Zoe set the solar system model carefully on the seat. She slipped her iPad into her backpack, zipped it shut, and slung the bag over her shoulder before stepping out of the car, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. She walked to her father's side, and Sanjay placed his hand on her shoulder, not gripping, not pulling, just resting there, a point of contact that told her she was not alone. Delacroix began searching the back seat. She moved quickly, checking under the seats between the cushions in the door pockets. Her flashlight swept across a water bottle, across a crumpled permission slip for the science fair. In her haste, her forearm caught the solar system model that Zoe had placed on the seat. The model slid sideways and tumbled to the floor of the car. The fishing line tangled. Saturn, the yellow foam ball still waiting for its rings, broke free and rolled under the passenger seat. The Earth, the one Zoe had painted by hand with tiny, careful brush strokes, scraped against the floor mat and came up with a long scratch across the blue. Zoe saw it through the window. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just reached for her father's hand and held it so tightly that her knuckles went pale. Sanjay saw it too. The model he and Zoe had spent 2 weeks building together, painting planets at the kitchen table after dinner, Zoe explaining which colors were accurate and which were artistic choices, both of them laughing when Mars ended up looking more like a basketball than a planet. That model on the floor of Denise's car under the boots of a stranger who had no legal right to be there. He swallowed the feeling down, not because he didn't have the right to feel it, but because his daughter was watching, and the lesson she learned tonight would be the one he chose to teach, not the one the situation was trying to force on him. Delacroix finished her search. She found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband, no evidence of anything except a family driving home on a Tuesday night. She backed out of the car without comment. Rivera stood by his cruiser, arms crossed, watching. He had not participated in the search. He had not been asked to. and in the incident report he would have to file later, there would be a gap, a silence where his opinion should have been that would eventually become the loudest thing about this night. Delacroix returned Sanjay's documents. She held them out with a flat expression and 4 words that carried no apology, no explanation, and no acknowledgement of what had just happened. "You're free to go." Sanjay took the papers. He helped Zoe back into the car, buckled her seatbelt, and picked up the solar system model from the floor. Saturn was missing somewhere under the seat. The Earth had a scratch that ran from the Pacific Ocean to somewhere over Africa. The fishing line was a knot of tangles. He placed the model gently on the seat beside Zoe and closed the door. "Daddy," Zoe said quietly as he pulled back onto County Road 12, the red and blue lights shrinking in the mirror. "Did we do something wrong?" 3 seconds of silence filled the car. 3 seconds that held 15 years of stops and searches and hands on steering wheels and questions that should never have been asked. "No, sweetheart," Sanjay said. "We didn't do anything wrong." They drove the rest of the way home without playing 20 questions. That night, after Zoe had brushed her teeth and climbed into bed and kissed the framed photo of Denise on her nightstand, another ritual, another way of keeping her mother close. Sanjay went back outside. He sat in the Mercedes alone in the driveway with the engine off, and the dome light casting a soft glow across the dashboard. The vanilla air freshener turned slowly in the vent. He opened his phone and played back the recording. The audio was clear. His phone had been in the center console microphone facing up, and it had captured everything Delacroix's initial request. His responses, her claim about an odor, his explicit statement of non-consent, the search, the backup call. Every word, every inflection, every silence. Sanjay listened to it twice. He didn't listen the way a father listens, with the hot, tight anger of a man whose daughter was just made to stand on a roadside under police lights. He listened the way a civil rights attorney listens, clinically, systematically mapping each moment against the law. He counted at least 4 clear procedural violations. The initial stop lacked probable cause. The claim of detecting an odor was fabricated to justify a search. There was no reasonable suspicion articulated at any point, and the handling of a minor during the encounter failed to meet departmental guidelines for interactions involving children. Sanjay saved the file. He didn't call anyone that night. He didn't draft a complaint or reach out to his firm. He simply saved the recording, locked his phone, and sat in his wife's car for a long time, listening to the quiet. He knew the system. He had spent his career inside it, fighting it, navigating it, watching it protect the people it was designed to protect and fail the people it had always failed. One audio recording, no matter how clear, was not enough. It was never enough by itself. What Sanjay didn't know was that 8 miles away, in a small apartment on the east side of town, Officer Daniel Rivera was sitting at his kitchen table, with his laptop open and his wife standing behind him reading over his shoulder. He had told her everything, not in the language of an official report, in the language of a man who knew he had watched something wrong happen and done nothing to stop it. His wife, a middle school teacher who spent her days watching children navigate a world that wasn't built for all of them, equally had listened without interruption and then said only, "Write it down." So Rivera wrote an email. Short, factual, stripped of opinion, just the date, the time, the location, and a description of what he had observed. He saved it in his drafts folder. He didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. But it existed now, a small record of a conscience that wasn't ready to act, but wasn't willing to forget. The next morning, Sanjay woke early, made Zoe's lunch turkey sandwich apple slices a note that said, "Saturn will have its rings tonight, I promise," and drove her to school in the Mercedes. They were 2 blocks from the building when Zoe said something that changed everything. "Daddy, I recorded it." Sanjay looked at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "Last night, when the police lady told you to get out of the car." Zoe pulled her iPad from her backpack, the same backpack she had carried out of the car with her the night before. I use this. I started recording when she told you to step out. Sanjay pulled the car to the curb. He turned around in his seat. Why did you do that, Zoe? Her answer was simple, and it broke something inside him. Because you always say, write it down, record it, keep the truth. I remembered. It was something he had told her, not about police stops, not about race, just a general lesson about honesty and memory. Keep the truth where you can find it. He'd said it about homework, about promises, about the small everyday moments when people say one thing and do another. He never imagined his 11-year-old daughter would apply it to watching her father stand on the side of a road with his hands open under flashing lights. Sanjay took the iPad. The video was 9 minutes and 42 seconds long. The angle was shaky, slightly low, the perspective of a child filming from behind a car seat trying to be invisible, but it was clear. It showed Delacroix searching the vehicle. It showed her knocking the solar system model to the floor. It showed Sanjay standing outside, hands at his side suit jacket catching the red and blue light. A 41-year-old man in professional clothes standing on the shoulder of a county road at night, compliant and calm, and still treated as though his presence required justification. The camera never shook with fear. Zoe's breathing was steady on the audio-measured, deliberate, the breathing of a child who was not panicking, but documenting. And somehow that steadiness made the video harder to watch than any shaky, tearful footage ever could. Sanjay handed the iPad back. He drove Zoe to school. He watched her walk through the front doors carrying her backpack and the scratched solar system model, and he sat in the car for a long time after she disappeared inside. Then he called his office and cleared his schedule for the week. Sanjay filed a formal complaint with the police department 3 days later. He submitted the audio recording, a written statement, and a detailed account of the procedural violations he had identified. He did not mention the video, not yet. The response was not surprise, it was not outrage, it was not even denial. It was something more practiced than any of those, the institutional equivalent of a long, slow exhale designed to make the problem feel smaller than it was. His complaint was received and under review. An interview was scheduled, then postponed again. Delacroix was reassigned to a different shift, but not suspended a lateral move that acknowledged nothing while appearing to do something. Internal Affairs opened a preliminary investigation and concluded within 2 weeks that there was insufficient basis to determine serious misconduct, and that Officer Delacroix had acted within the scope of her situational assessment in the field. Sanjay was not surprised. He had sat across from a dozen department attorneys in his career, listened to a dozen versions of the same language designed not to communicate, but to insulate, to wrap an institution's failures in enough procedure and passive voice that accountability became invisible. On the other side of the process, Karen Delacroix felt the weight begin to lift. Internal Affairs had cleared her. The complaint had been filed and handled. The system had done what the system always did, absorb the impact, distribute the pressure, and keep moving forward as though nothing had changed. In that false safety, she made the decision that would eventually end her career. She filed a supplemental report on the traffic stop, a follow-up memo, that described Sanjay Webb as uncooperative, displaying signs of potential aggression, and characterized his behavior as evasive and confrontational. She wrote that his refusal to consent to the search had raised additional concerns about the contents of the vehicle. She described the stop as justified based on observed behavioral indicators. Every word of it contradicted the audio recording. In the recording, Sanjay was calm, polite, and cooperative from the first sentence to the last. His refusal of consent was stated in measured legal language. There was no evasion, no confrontation, no aggression potential or otherwise. Delacroix didn't know about the recording when she wrote the report. She was building a wall brick by careful brick around a decision she couldn't afford to admit was wrong. She thought the report would protect her. She thought it would become the official version of events buried in a file that no one would ever read twice. She didn't understand that she was writing her own confession not of bias, which was deniable, but of dishonesty, which was not. Sanjay waited 3 weeks. He gave the system every opportunity to respond with substance. When it responded with silence instead, he made his next move. He posted Zoe's video on social media. He didn't editorialize. He didn't rage. He wrote a short caption in the same calm, measured voice that had characterized every interaction he'd had since that Tuesday night. "This is what my daughter witnessed on County Road 12. She is 11 years old. She recorded this because I taught her to keep the truth where she can find it." The video reached 10,000 views in 12 hours. It reached 200,000 in 48. It was not Sanjay's name or credentials that drove the sharing. Most people who watched didn't know he was an attorney. It was the angle. The video had been filmed from the back seat of a car through the gap between headrest and window by a child who held her iPad steady while her father was made to stand in the flashing lights. Every parent who watched it saw their own child holding that device. Every parent felt the cold arithmetic of what it meant that an 11-year-old had learned to document instead of trust. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national, not because the story was unusual, but because the footage made the usual impossible to ignore. And then the second earthquake hit. An investigative journalist at the regional paper, a woman named Claire Thornton, who had been covering policing and racial profiling for over a decade, began pulling Delacroix's traffic stop records. What she found turned a single incident into a pattern. Over the previous 3 years, 74% of Delacroix's discretionary stops, made without a clear traffic violation based solely on officer judgment, involved Black or Latino drivers, in a jurisdiction where the Black population was 22%. The numbers were not ambiguous. They were not a matter of interpretation. They were a statistical fingerprint of something that had been operating in plain sight for years, undetected only because no one had looked. And the reason no one had looked was simple. None of Delacroix's previous targets had filed a formal complaint. The system didn't fail because it couldn't detect bias. It failed because it was designed to run on the silence of the people it harmed. That silence began to break. 2 former targets came forward within a week of the video going public. The first was a woman named Patricia Holloway, a registered nurse who had been pulled over by Delacroix 14 months earlier while driving her husband's truck to a night shift. Delacroix had questioned her for 20 minutes, searched the truck, and found nothing. Patricia had gone home shaking, sat in her garage for an hour, and never told anyone except her husband. She didn't file a complaint because she didn't believe anything would come of it. The second was a man named David Washington, a high school history teacher who had been stopped by Delacroix 9 months before Sanjay. His stop had been shorter, just questions, no search, but the pattern was the same. An expensive watch on the wrist of a man Delacroix decided shouldn't be wearing one. David had thought about complaining. He'd looked up the process, read about internal affairs, and closed his laptop. "I just didn't think anyone would listen," he told the journalist. They were listening now. And then Officer Rivera opened his laptop, found the draft email he'd written the night of Sanjay's stop, and sent it to Internal Affairs. He understood what it might cost him, the silence of the rank and file, the unspoken code that protected officers who protected each other. He sent it anyway because his wife's words had been sitting in his chest for 3 weeks, and because the video of an 11-year-old girl holding an iPad steady while her father stood in handcuff position on a county road had made silence feel like something he could no longer carry. The evidence was now a wall that Delacroix could not climb over. The audio recording, the video, the false supplemental report, the 74% statistic. Rivera's statement. 2 additional witnesses. Each piece alone might have been survivable. Together, they were a demolition. Delacroix was suspended with pay pending the outcome of a reopened investigation. Her colleagues began to distance themselves, not dramatically, not publicly, but in the way that institutions shed liability. Lunch invitations stopped. Conversations in the break room shifted to silence when she walked in. The police union, which would normally have deployed its full weight in defense of an officer under investigation, hesitated. The case was too public, the footage too clear, the numbers too damning. And then, on a Thursday evening, her phone rang. It was Ryan, her 10-year-old son, calling from his father's house. His voice was small in a way that she hadn't heard since he was much younger, small in a way that meant he was trying to hold something together. "Mom, the kids at school are saying you hate black people. Is that true?" Karen Delacroix stood in her kitchen phone pressed to her ear, and for the first time since that Tuesday night on County Road 12, the wall of justification she had built around herself cracked from the inside. Not because the answer was yes, she would have said no, and in some narrow technical sense she might have believed it, but because she was hearing her own actions described by her own child, filtered through the understanding of a 10-year-old boy who needed his mother to be the person she had always told him she was. She didn't have an answer, not one that would fit in a phone call, not one that would undo what he'd already heard. On County Road 12, she had made a choice. In her supplemental report, she had made another. And now, standing in her kitchen with her son's voice in her ear, she was beginning to understand that the person those choices had damaged most was not Sanjay Webb and not Zoe, and not the nurse or the teacher who had been stopped before them. It was the woman she had spent 12 years believing she was tough, but fair, experienced, trustworthy. That woman was gone now, dismantled not by accusation, but by evidence. And the person left standing in her place was someone Karen Delacroix did not recognize and could not defend. Sanjay spent the next week caught between two versions of the same future. In one, the fight was over. Delacroix had been suspended. The video had been seen by hundreds of thousands of people. The journalists' numbers were public. Patricia Holloway and David Washington had given their statements. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and the system, slow, reluctant, dragged by the weight of its own machinery, was beginning to move. Many people would have called this enough. Many people would have taken the win and gone home. In the other version, the fight was just beginning. Because a suspension with pay was not a consequence, it was a vacation funded by taxpayers. Because the false supplemental report Delacroix had filed sat in a department archive uncorrected and unchallenged, still listed as the official account of what happened that night. And because the 74%, that number Claire Thornton had pulled from the records like a bone from the earth, meant the problem was never one officer on one road on one night. It was a system that had allowed that officer to operate unchecked for 12 years, not because no one noticed, but because the people who were harmed had learned that speaking up changed nothing. Sanjay could stop here. Zoe would be out of the spotlight. Their life could return to the shape it held before County Road 12 or something close to it. He could go back to building solar system models and playing 20 questions and driving home in Denise's car with the vanilla air freshener turning slowly in the vent. Or he could do what he had spent 15 years helping other people do, stand in a courtroom and demand that the system answer for itself. He called his mother on a Saturday morning. Gloria Webb was 71, a retired postal worker who had raised 3 children in a neighborhood where the mailboxes got hit by cars more often than they got fixed, and who had buried her daughter-in-law with the kind of quiet, unbreakable grace that Sanjay still didn't fully understand. She listened to everything, the stop, the search, the video, the investigation, the report, the numbers, without interrupting. When Sanjay finished, the line was quiet for a long time. Then Gloria said, "Sanjay, if you stop now, that little girl learns that justice only goes halfway. If you keep going, she learns her daddy doesn't quit. Either way, she's watching. You decide what she sees." Sanjay filed a civil lawsuit the following Monday, not against Karen Delacroix as an individual, but against the police department as an institution. The distinction mattered. He wasn't chasing a single officer's badge. He was challenging the architecture that had given that badge its power and then looked the other way while it was misused. His demands were 3. First, the department would implement a traffic stop data monitoring system, a mechanism for tracking patterns in discretionary stops by officer, by demographic, by outcome, with quarterly audits and public reporting. Second, mandatory implicit bias training for the entire force administered by an external organization with no departmental affiliation. Third, formal disciplinary action against Officer Delacroix based on the documented evidence of filing a false supplemental report. He did not ask for money. He was asked about this in every interview by every journalist by the department's own attorneys during the discovery process. The answer was always the same: I don't need a settlement. I need this to not happen to the next father driving his daughter home. The department's legal team responded with what Sanjay had expected: a settlement offer, significant money, a confidentiality agreement, a non-disclosure clause that would seal the case, bury the supplemental report, and ensure that the 74% statistic never appeared in a courtroom. It was the kind of offer designed to make the problem disappear quietly, wrapped in enough zeros to make silence feel like a reasonable exchange. Sanjay declined. His attorney, a colleague from his firm who had volunteered the moment the lawsuit was filed, presented the refusal in writing one sentence long: "My client's interest is systemic reform, not financial remedy." The case moved forward. It was not fast. Justice in a courtroom never moves at the speed of depositions and continuances and motions to dismiss each one, a small delay designed to test whether the plaintiff's resolve is as strong as their argument. Sanjay's resolve did not waver, but it cost him. He spent nights reviewing documents instead of painting planets. He missed 2 of Zoe's school events, something that burned in him more than any legal setback, because the whole point of this fight was to protect a world where a father could show up for his daughter without being made to stand on a roadside first. The resolution, when it came, arrived not with a verdict, but with a settlement on Sanjay's terms. The department, facing the combined weight of the video footage, the audio recording, the false report, the statistical analysis, Rivera's sworn statement, and the testimony of Patricia Holloway and David Washington, agreed to all 3 demands. The data monitoring system was implemented within 90 days, a real mechanism, with real oversight, not a checkbox on a compliance form. Every discretionary stop would be logged, categorized, and reviewed. Patterns would be flagged. Officers with disproportionate numbers would be required to undergo additional review. It was not a perfect system. No system is. But it was a system that existed where none had existed before, and its existence meant that the next Karen Delacroix would be visible long before her 74th percent. The implicit bias training was contracted to an independent organization and made mandatory for all active officers with annual renewal. Rivera was assigned to the department's training division to help develop the curriculum, a quiet irony that he carried with the seriousness of a man who understood he was now teaching others the lesson he had almost failed to act on himself. And Karen Delacroix was terminated. Not for the traffic stop itself. The legal scaffolding around discretionary stops was too forgiving for that alone. She was fired for the supplemental report. The document she had written to protect herself, the one that described Sanjay Webb as uncooperative and potentially aggressive, the one she had crafted carefully in the belief that it would become the final word, had been placed side by side with the audio recording in which Sanjay was calm, polite, and cooperative from first word to last. The contradiction was not a matter of interpretation, it was a matter of fact. And in law enforcement, dishonesty in an official report is not a procedural error, it is a disqualifying act. Delacroix was placed on the Brady list, a national registry of officers whose documented dishonesty renders them unable to serve as credible witnesses in court. For a police officer, the Brady list is not a suspension or a demotion. It is an ending. No department will hire an officer who cannot testify. No prosecutor will build a case on the word of a witness the defense can dismantle with a single document. Karen Delacroix would never carry a badge again. She did not give interviews. She did not make public statements. She did not appear on television to offer the kind of carefully worded apology that means nothing and changes less. She simply disappeared first from the department, then from the neighborhood, then from the town itself. The house she rented went back on the market. The women she used to have coffee with on Sunday mornings stopped receiving her texts, not because she was blocked, but because there was nothing left to say. The parents at Ryan's school, the ones who used to wave from across the parking lot, began looking through her instead of at her. It was not dramatic. It was not violent. It was the slow, thorough erasure that happens when a community decides without discussion that someone is no longer part of it. She had believed that her career was the last solid thing in her life, the foundation she stood on after the divorce, after losing custody, after every personal failure she had absorbed and survived. Now that foundation was gone, and what lay beneath it was a question she had never allowed herself to ask. Who was she without the badge? She had spent 12 years telling herself she was tough but fair. She had trusted her instincts the way a pilot trusts instruments automatically without verification. And on a Tuesday night on County Road 12, those instincts had locked onto a black Mercedes driven by a man in a suit with his daughter in the back seat, and they had whispered that something didn't fit, and she had listened. She had listened because she always listened. And she had never once stopped to ask whether the voice she was trusting was experience or something older, something quieter, something she had carried so long she had mistaken it for her own judgment. She thought she had stopped a car that night. She had stopped her own future. 4 months after the settlement, on a bright morning in early spring, Sanjay Webb pulled the Mercedes into the drop-off lane in front of Zoe's school. The vanilla air freshener turned in the vent. Sunlight came through the windshield and caught the dashboard, where Zoe always placed her hand. On the back seat, resting in a cardboard box lined with tissue paper, was a new solar system model. Sanjay and Zoe had rebuilt it from scratch. Over 3 weekends, new foam balls, new paint, new fishing line. The Earth was rounder this time. Mars was still too orange because Zoe insisted that was an artistic choice and not a mistake. And Saturn finally had its rings-thin cardboard circles that Zoe had cut and painted with silver acrylic glued in place with the precision of a girl who understood that some things are worth doing twice. Zoe unbuckled her seatbelt and reached forward to press her palm against the dashboard. "Hello, Mama." Then she picked up her backpack and the solar system model and turned to open the door. But before she did, she looked at her father in the rearview mirror. "Daddy, do I always have to record things like forever?" It was a simple question from an 11-year-old girl getting ready for school. But Sanjay heard what lived inside it, the weight of a lesson learned too early, the question of whether vigilance was something she would carry for the rest of her life, whether the world would always require her to document her own innocence before it would believe her. Sanjay turned in his seat to face her. "No, baby. You don't have to be afraid. But you have to know your rights. And you have to know that the truth always matters, even when nobody wants to hear it." Zoe thought about this for a moment, the way she thought about everything seriously, carefully, with the quiet focus of a girl who was already learning that the world was more complicated than solar systems and science fairs. Then she nodded the way her father nodded once, with weight. She stepped out of the car, closed the door gently, and walked toward the school entrance with the solar system model held steady in both arms. Saturn's new rings caught the morning light and threw small silver reflections across the sidewalk. Sanjay watched her until she disappeared through the front doors. He sat in the car a moment longer in Denise's car, in the vanilla-scented quiet, in the space where his family lived, even when only he was sitting in it. Then he started the engine and drove to work. On a quiet stretch of County Road 12, a Tuesday night had begun like any other, and a woman with a badge had made a decision that took 3 seconds and cost her everything. Not because she pulled over a car, but because she couldn't admit she had no reason to. Not because she searched a vehicle, but because she wrote a lie to justify it. Not because she carried bias, but because she called it instinct and never looked deeper. She stopped a car that night. But what she really stopped was her own future. And an 11-year-old girl with a solar system model learned something that no science fair project could ever teach her, that the truth doesn't protect itself. Someone has to hold it steady even when their hands are shaking. Someone has to keep it where it can be found. Zoe Webb held it steady, and the world for once was listening. This story started with a traffic stop on a quiet road, but the question it leaves behind isn't quiet at all. Have you ever watched someone pay the price for a bias they refused to see in themselves? Or have you ever stayed silent when you knew something wasn't right, the way Rivera almost did? There's no easy answer, and maybe that's the point. If this story made you feel something, I'd love to hear what it was. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you think someone in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. Sometimes the stories that matter most are the ones we pass along. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like these don't stop here. There are more coming, and every single one of them is worth your time.